Welcome to Oceanside Chat, Light Beyond Generations. This podcast was created to inspire, motivate, and provide insight through industry professionals sharing personal stories, career aspirations, and practical advice. Our guest is Lynn Torrel, Chief Procurement and Supply Chain Officer at L.I.T.E, a global diversified manufacturer that helps a diverse customer base design and build products that improve the world. Time to get your feet wet in the business world and join us down by the water as we have an Oceanside Chat. Season 2, Episode 6, Supply Clarity Through Demand Transparency. Welcome to Oceanside Chat. I'm Helen Wang, the host and editor of the program. When I started Season 2 in February, I planned a total of 8 episodes. However, in the past few weeks, the program's popularity led to greater demand for high quality and impactful content. Since balancing demand and supply is my profession, I decided to increase supply by onboarding more industry executives and thought leaders to share their perspectives and expertise. Today marks the 6th episode, a halfway milestone of Season 2. It's also a great moment to celebrate our supportive and fast-growing community who join the live sessions and listen to our podcast. More than 40% of registration are from word of mouth. So thank you for sharing the program with your network. And please know that you are why we keep doing what we do. What comes to your mind when people mention supply shortage? Not only the word shortage triggers negative emotion associated with trouble, but also the word supply implies the cause of the problem. Suppose you remember the earlier example of my podcast. At first, I had no idea if people would like the program. Soon it became clear that a positive market reaction demands more episodes. Then my ability to get more speakers and produce more episodes determined the available supply. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Lynn Torrel, Chief Procurement and Supply Chain Officer at L.I.T.E, a global diversified manufacturer that helps a diverse customer base design and build products that improve the world. Lynn, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Helen. It's a pleasure to be here today.
What would your superpower be and why?
I would say my superpower is the ability to multitask. I feel like in life and in a professional environment, being able to prioritize and multitask and address different situations effectively, but at the same time would probably be my superpower.
Wow, everybody would love to have that superpower. If you had to teach a class on one thing, what would you teach?
Oh, interesting. I think I would like to teach leadership, because there's specifics in every type of discipline. Leading an organization and really developing leadership skills, it can transcend to multiple disciplines. So that would be a subject that I would be interested in teaching.
Great. You will receive our invitation pretty soon,
Okay.
I'm sure. I also have noticed a few keywords in your company's description, and in particular, global diversified manufacturing that helps a diverse customer base. Could you please tell us more about L.I.T.'s scope and footprint and the diverse aspect of business landscape and customer base?
Certainly, and I think that is a great way to start the conversation, to have a good understanding of L.I.T., where we sit in the supply chain and the complexity of our global organization. So L.I.T. is an electronic manufacturing services provider. We build product for our customers. We help in the design of those products, whether it be designed for manufacturing or in the design of the bill of materials. But in essence, we're building their product. So we partner very closely with our customers when they're looking at their design, as well as choosing their manufacturing strategy, because we have facilities all over the world. And to give that some context, L.I.T. works with about 1,000 customers whose global supply chains we manage. We have over 130 manufacturing locations in over 30 countries around the world. about 160,000 employees who are building those products every day. And our revenue is about 25 billion. And we support customers in multiple segments. We have automotive customers, medical solutions customers, industrial customers, our cloud, energy, and power business, as well as the consumer devices. We have a tremendous visibility across a number of industries that utilize high-tech manufacturing. And from a supply chain perspective, we work with about 16,000 suppliers to build those products. And that translates into about 1 million part numbers. So it's an incredibly complex and diversified supply chain that we manage on a global basis.
Well, those are astonishing numbers.
Yep.
From number of employees to number of suppliers and customers, as well as global location and the manufacturing site. Very, very impressive. So what attracted you to join Flex in 2019?
Well, it's interesting. Like you said, Flex has one of the most sophisticated and complex global supply chains in the world. Prior to joining Flex, I spent 25 years in electronics distribution at Avnet. And I had a variety of different roles, customer facing, supplier facing, and supply chain. My last role was president of a business unit, and I was supporting Flex as a supplier, as well as looking after the tier 1 EMS and OEM customers at Flex. So I had a visibility into the Flex organization because I'd worked with EMS customers and with Flex for many years. But I was very intrigued about the idea to go to the other side, on the customer side, and look at the manufacturing side. And Avnet's a wonderful organization. I had a wonderful career, but just that draw of extending my learning and my skill set and being able to join a company like Flex, managing their global end-to-end supply chain, I thought was very intriguing for my personal growth, as well as bringing in the experience I had in distribution for many years. So I thought it was a really nice fit. And as you said, I joined Flex in October of 2019.
Mm-hmm. So how many people are working for you now, and where are they located?
We have about 9,000 employees in our global procurement and supply chain organization, and they're located all over the world. So my responsibilities are that end-to-end supply chain. So it's direct and indirect procurement, freight and logistics, our component services business, our inventory management, operations management, as well as our strategic supply chain engagements with our customers and suppliers. So it's a pretty complex and broad organization, but we have employees located at every site. And we also have centers of excellence around the world where we have larger populations of our employees who help manage this very complex supply chain.
So 9,000 people around the world. How would you describe your job to a 5-year-old?
That's a good question. Actually, it was kind of hard to describe my job in the past. But now that supply chain has come to the forefront, many people are really understanding it in their day-to-day business. But, it's making sure we have the right pieces at the right time and place at the right price to enable full production and supporting our customer needs.
Yeah. You joined Flex in October 2019, right? A few months later, the global pandemic hit. So for the past 2.5 years as a chief procurement and supply chain officer at a Flex, how would you describe your experience in 3 to 5 words?
Exciting, challenging, and exhilarating.
Wow, I feel like a lot of energy just from these 3 words.
And it really is, because the pandemic, when it hit in China in January, we've started feeling the impact already in mid-January of 2020. It wasn't until March that the US kind of shut down. When I started joining Flex, 5 months, almost 6 months of kind of traveling around and meeting people and going to our sites, analyzing our production capabilities, most importantly, meeting with my team, as well as our customers and suppliers. And then obviously we went into lockdown and it was a crisis situation. And if you think about that time, Flex was closing and reopening every one of our manufacturing facilities all over the world, as well as our suppliers were doing the same. So my organization needed to understand what would that impact be to the supply chain. because when you reopen, you lose some output. A lot of times capacity was reduced. So we were constantly looking at analyzing the customer demand, analyzing the supplier responses, and wanting to reconfirm all of that information. And we started in mid-January actually having a daily call with my direct team as well as some members of an extended team. So it was daily calls for about 5 months. And I like to point this out, it was 5:30 in the morning my time, because that was the best time to actually have a global call with our team. And it was during that time when we would say, what are we seeing from our customers, from our suppliers? What are we hearing from our government relations? What are we hearing in the media? And we'd make decisions that we would follow for the next 24 hours. And then we would get together again the next morning and have that. And that's why I mean, it was kind of challenging, exciting, exhilarating. There was, in this role that we have and knowing we're making critical products for the world, you have that passion to wake up early and really try and solve those challenges and make the best decisions you can, knowing that you're going to address and have numerous challenges follow on. So I think that was a pretty interesting time, and I'm really proud of the work that the Flex Global Procurement and Supply Chain team did during that time, because it was working closely with a lot of stakeholders, customers, suppliers, our business unit, our operations, to do the best we could to keep operations running.
What is the one thing or maybe one impact that your organization as well as Flex has made during the pandemic that made you most proud?
Probably what I'm most proud of is the fact that Flex partnered with a medical company to make ventilators early in the pandemic when there was a need for more ventilator production. And prior to that, all the manufacturing for ventilators was done in-house by the companies that supplied them because technical nature. But we were partnered because they needed to ramp up very quickly. So we were able to launch ventilator production in 3 regions in the world in 3 months. And of course, that was dealing with all of the supply chain constraints that were taking place at the same time. So my team was busy bringing in all of the parts that were needed. Our engineers were working on the technology. Our production sites were working on the capabilities. And in 2020, Flex made more ventilators than were produced in all of 2019. And that now that business has gone away. So we also worked really hard to ramp business quickly that we were hoping would go away because it would no longer be needed. But if you think about the pride that an organization can have, and that we had personally, I think being able to help the world in the COVID crisis was very impactful.
Yeah, I remember that I was listening to the news on the TV when Flex was stepping in and step up and ramp up the ventilator at the fastest speed you could and save a lot of life. Those are very, very inspiring memory that the industry as well as your people will remember. Yeah, wonderful story. Thanks for sharing that. Is the current semiconductor shortage caused by insufficient supply or artificial demand? It's a single choice question. Wow, we have 47% answered insufficient supply. Also, 47% answered 50-50 split between the supply and artificial demand. So there's only 6% think the shortage was caused by artificial demand. Lynn, what's your perspective?
I think in this case, it's really a split between the two, the insufficient supply and the artificial demand. I've been in this industry a long time, and I've gone through a few cycles, especially the semiconductor cycles, where you have demand outstripping supply, and over a period of time, capacity investments are made. You have more supply that comes out, and then you have a time of excess. And whenever there's constrained parts, you do see human behavior is to order a little bit more than you need to hopefully get what you want, to make sure that you're fighting really hard for your company and your organization. But even more impactful right now, especially with the crisis we're seeing today, it's the proliferation of semiconductor content into non-traditional devices that has made the forecasting of the demand very difficult. You add that to the incredible strength across our industries for demand. there's a number of reasons for it. You could say it's 5G rollout, electric vehicles. It could be incentive spending by consumers buying more goods for their home because of COVID. A lot of variables can go into that. But what we also see is in many cases, you'll have industry demand predicted for a market. You can say smart energy is going to grow 20% because of the activities that are taking place. And that's at an industry level. Well, typically you have a few strong players who are all going to forecast for that demand because they're hoping that they'll capture the entire industry demand, maybe a little bit more to get market share. But when you have multiple companies doing that, then you get that artificial demand flowing through an incredibly complex ecosystem because there's many players. And one of the challenges that we have, especially in this industry, when you're looking at high tech, there's a significant amount of investment that needs to be made to increase capacity. And it takes years before you really realize that capacity. So the challenges that we have in forecasting demand are very difficult. And it's something that's not new to the industry. It's always been a challenge. And it's something we need to look at different ways in which we can improve the demand forecasting throughout the ecosystem.
Yeah, I also think in supply and demand is an ongoing thing, right? And it goes through some cycle. Depends on what was the biggest event happened and which part of the cycle we are in. So I definitely agree with you and the audience. I think the split between the supply side as well as the demand side. So that perfectly leads to our topic today. I would like to address the elephant in the room. Simply put, demand transparency requires companies to know what is happening downstream in the supply chain and then communicate this knowledge internally and externally. So Lynn, I know you have been leading an initiative to increase demand transparency for more sustainable global supply chain ecosystem. Could you tell us more about why you are passionate about this topic and what are you trying to achieve? And also give us some examples.
Yes, I am passionate about this topic. I feel like as a supply chain professional, navigating the challenges of the past 2 years and seeing the significant impact it's having on the world, different industries, people's income, potential risk involved that we see going forward. I feel like we have an obligation to look for ways to improve the entire agility and resiliency of the global supply chains. And I mentioned earlier about companies forecasting for the same demand or the same potential growth. What we've never been able to solve for is how can you rationalize that demand? And again, every company, they have their order book, they have their forecast, they have their sales and marketing plans, they want to grow their business. So when we say artificial demand, I'm not saying anybody's a bad actor in this or trying necessarily to inflate it, but growing their business and being very optimistic about their growth opportunities. But in a very complex global supply chain, if you think you have the brand owners who partner with a company like Flex to do their production, we work with distribution and we work with the suppliers directly. Especially on the semiconductor side, you have suppliers who are fabless, who work with other external partners for the silicon and then outsource back-end test and assembly and packaging. So it's a really complex supply chain. So when we start at the very beginning, where you see some demand being duplicated because companies are going after the same opportunity, it just gets exasperated throughout the system. And it becomes very difficult to plan for the future and to work through some potential noise in the system. So I'm advocating, and I've brought together some industry professionals to work together collaboratively to say, okay, these are the challenges we're currently facing, and for many of us have faced a few times in our career. What are some initiatives we could work on to try and ease some of the challenges, alleviate some of the constraints that are currently faced and work towards a better future, utilizing the data we have in a different way, because there is a lot of data. We have a very sophisticated supply chain, but it becomes, as I mentioned, with that proliferation of semiconductor content, the customer base has gotten so much broader. And for every company in the channel or in the ecosystem, you're always trying to maximize capacity. So the idea is, can we get together? Can we share information in a different way? Still very protected, very secure, but just to enable better planning across the ecosystem.
Do you think Flex is positioned to lead an initiative like this?
It was an idea that came from Flex that we had, but we are looking at putting together an appropriate organization to lead this, because it should be more independent, in my opinion. But the nice thing I have is there's a lot of people that I've spoken to who are interested in looking at different ways in which we can partner together and drive a better supply chain for the world.
I can totally see a strong reason to support an initiative like this, because resources are very limited, right? The reason that we have shortage is because it's not enough, whether it's triggered by the demand or whether it's triggered by supply. But the bottom line is we don't have enough resources, and we wanted to manage the resources the most optimal way and benefits the greater society. So there's definitely a good reason to support that. My question will be, we're all in value supply chain system, and in your perspective, what are some of the players should joining this kind of initiative and collaborating in a way that will yield out some good outcome? Do you think the upstream of the supply chain or the downstream of the supply chain, or?
It's everybody. It's really everybody across the ecosystem to understand. One of the areas we talk to a lot is the challenges of our suppliers' and in getting visibility into that. And that's been talked about for my entire career, and it's hard and it's expensive and it's challenging, but having that knowledge of a potential impact to your supplier is very important. And that really came to light through COVID and through the multitude of supply chain challenges that we've been facing over the past 2 years. So it is a requirement to get deeper into the supply chain and to understand where those critical inflection points can occur that would cause problems.
Lynn, the reason that I was asking the question whether Flex is well positioned to lead is because, first of all, you initiated this as a chief supply chain and procurement officer. Secondly, if we talk about a forecast, is really customers' visibility, customer understanding of the market. So I think Flex is in the important part of the chain that you have a lot of visibility to both upstream as well as the downstream. And then you are very close to your customer, also very close to the end user, right? So arguably speaking, that downstream supply chain has more visibility in terms of the forecast. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it is. We obviously, work really closely with our customers who, like you said, have visibility into the end markets. But where Flex sits, we're building for our customers. We're their partners. Although we have a lot of information, it's confidential. So nothing can be worked out differently than it's done today until we address those issues of security and confidentiality. But I do think, to your point, Flex is a great visibility of our supply base. When 16,000 suppliers is daunting that we work with for our direct procurement. But when you break that down into the preferred suppliers, the growth suppliers, and really understanding and partnering with the ones that are really important to the future, it's manageable. And that's where we need to make sure we're looking at all aspects of the complex supply chain and how we can, improve that demand forecasting, which helps with capacity planning, which would hopefully in the future, because it's not a short-term solution. It's a futuristic vision to help prevent some of the challenges we're facing today from facing in the future. Although that being said, some of these could have been predicted, others absolutely could not, right? So there's certain challenges we faced this past year that you can't mitigate completely against them. The COVID impact that you're having, or when you have lockdowns in cities. Once the pandemic started, maybe had predicted, yep, we're going to see some challenges there. but already then you're in a supply constraint environment. So you need to do a combination of look at ways in which you can prevent future supply chain impacts, but probably at the same time, and more importantly, how do you react quickly to mitigate a supply chain impact, because not everything is preventable.
Mhm. So I'm curious, I have a few follow-up questions because Flex has customer base across all different industries. Let's say automobile industry, the cloud-based electronic, consumer electronics, medical is another important one. So do you actually see there's certain industry doing a better job in terms of providing transparency on demand forecasting, or do you actually thinking this is a universal challenge across all the industry?
Another answer where it's a little bit of both. Some of the larger high-tech companies who have been in this for a long time and have worked with advanced technology suppliers probably have a bit more visibility and transparency of their demand, because they need to partner with the suppliers because their demand is so large. So they're planning for future requirements. Now that isn't perfect, but there is more visibility there versus some of the smaller and mid-tier customers who don't have that level of visibility and transparency. So it's a combination.
Mm-hmm. I would like to reveal the result of our poll question here. The question is supply chain designed to be transparent? And a single choice. So yes, no, or don't know, 3 possible answers. We have 71% voted no, and then 18% voted yes, and 12% mentioning don't know. So it's very interesting. More than 70% thinking the supply chain system is not designed to be transparent. Lynn, what do you think?
There is a level of transparency, because typically when you're working in an industry like mine, information is tied to the brand owner or the end customer that we're working towards. So that information flows through the systems because it's needed by multiple players for different reasons, whether it be planning for the future, bonus payments for employees. There's reasons why that flows through. Where we don't see the transparency is the cross-industry requirements. That's where it gets more unclear when multiple players are forecasting for the same demand. And it's always a challenge too, right? Because anybody who predicts the future, you're only right after you revise those predictions and they've come true. But there are tools and process and data sets that are available to us that could help guide that forecasting of demand that's taken place by multiple constituents.
That's very interesting perspective. Maybe we treat this like a brainstorming session between us. Is supply chain designed to be transparent? Why and why not? A few reasons why. I think by nature, it could be transparent. Just name a few. One is supply chain is all connected. From upstream and downstream, you can see a flow. So clearly there's information, there's forecasting, there's data flows through the chain. Mm-hmm. So from technical standpoint, logically speaking, right, system design should be able to provide transparency. Second, because common resources are shared. I mean, electrification, you could imagine semiconductor is widely used across industry. So the same capacity, the same resources, same technology, same supply, could be shared among all these different companies, industries, and so on and so forth. So then you're able to track down what are those commonality among them and to find that transparency. And also, I think some industry, maybe the forecast is more known and stable. I may use defense as an example. When you get a contract, that forecast is very stable versus some industry is not.
I think you accurately captured them. There is tremendous data that flows through the system that does make it transparent, at the same time protecting the bills of materials of our customers and their core technologies. There is the data that flows through it, and it enables a level of visibility, but not enough today to really be able to identify the true demand that we're looking at. And that's the challenge. It is designed to be transparent with the data flow, but it's not able to correct or predict where we're seeing the demand coming through as being higher or lower than what the growth should be for that particular industry.
That's perfect because it leads to us to thinking about why not? Why not the system is transparent? We have a great comments from the audience. Let me just read it. Poking a hole in the concept, private entities view supply chain as a competitive advantages. So there is no interest in being transparent. And then organizations are trying to survive and driven by human behavior. It's not viewed as a global pandemic or environment cost effective millions cross countries. So you get the idea of the sentiment that there's a strong argument about the system is not meant to be transparent because of competitive advantage. I thought that was interesting if we further expand from a company industry perspective, but also from country standpoint, right? At a country level, these days, the supply chain strength become a country's competitiveness as well. So how do we thinking about that? And how do we overcome some of the challenges coming from that perspective?
Well, I think there were some really critical points that were mentioned. There is a need for secure data, and we do need to protect the customer's interests and their core competencies that come with that. And there is also the idea that, hey, this is not a problem for today, it's a problem for tomorrow or someone else's problem. There's an opportunity to use the data we have in a different way, still having that same security, because you can't forego the security. That's the critical part. Everybody's data needs to be secure. But can we look at utilizing an independent third party to utilize artificial intelligence with the data that is presented to provide output to companies that help them better plan their manufacturing? That's the core concept. We have to keep that data secure. There's other arguments. One could say, like at Flex, we have global scale and scope. We have an amazing tools and systems and processes. Helen, you've seen some of the capabilities we have. Our digitalization strategy is outstanding. So I could easily argue that Flex is in a strong position to manage through these supply chains better than our competition, right? That's looking at it one way from the business setting. From a personal setting, I'll say it again, I just think as supply chain professionals, living through what we're dealing with today, we have an obligation to look at ways to improve forecasting and managing supply to prevent or mitigate some of the challenges that we've been facing over the past 2 years. So there's the business case for it, but there's the humanitarian case for it as well.
I think the third party, a non-biased, neutral party, utilizing some of the technology, as you mentioned, artificial intelligence, keep in mind data security, data privacy will be the highest priority. That might give some visibility, like another reference point in terms of where the big picture is, where the high level forecast might be.
Yes, that's exactly the point. It's utilizing an independent third party. No single player in the ecosystem could do this because of the nature of the information. So the premise of trying to work at improving demand forecasting is using that independent third party with artificial intelligence to help and just to feed out information. Nobody would get information that's not applicable to them. It would only go back to the relevant stakeholder, what would be useful for them as part of their planning processes.
Yeah, I can see this extremely helpful. Let's use electrification as an example. When more and more electronics needs to be embedded in different devices, capabilities, machinery, both software and hardware enable, having a central point in terms of the forecast overview across industry for some common demand, common resources, I think would be really, really helpful. I understand the company are competing with each other within the same industry. From industry to industry, you'll be amazed about how much they are actually going to be competing on the common resources, especially the wave of electrification is coming. But yet they don't talk to each other. They don't know each other at all. So I think having that third party with a platform providing that type of information will be super helpful, at least for the supply chain to get ready.
There's all the talk about investments that are being made. at the foundry with the semiconductor suppliers to address this in the future. And that, again, takes time and planning before capacity comes out. But one of the challenges we have today is the most significant shortages we have are on the older technology nodes, where there isn't as much investment taking place. And so those older technology nodes will continue to cause problems until we get sufficient demand or we get more customers to transfer to the newer technologies. And that's always been a trade-off as well. So giving more insight into capacity output and future roadmaps for products to customers will certainly help make those decisions. And it's something that Flex works with every day. We have such a broad customer base and supplier base, and we work very closely with our suppliers, look at them and cost and quality and timeliness, all of those aspects, what their future roadmap is. So we're able to help our customers with some of their selection process to be able to say, these are suppliers that are going to have better capacity, that meet your technology needs and are a good choice for you as you're looking at redesigning your bill of materials.
That's great. I feel technology might be ready to tackle a challenge like this to provide demand transparency. The biggest challenge is really about how much the human behavior side of it willing to make and how much we feel comfortable about it.
The beauty about the true demand and using the artificial intelligence, it's not expecting any change of human behavior. It's taking industry growth targets and artificial intelligence and helping rationalize that, because you want to have people being very excited about their product and growing their portfolio and expanding it. So keeping that into consideration, I think, is important. If we get to a level of matched supply and demand, I think what everybody wants is for supply chain to go back into the background, right? So we don't have to talk about it every day. Well, historically, our supply chains were built on low-cost efficiency, and they worked very well. Nobody really talked about supply chain or the impact. What has really happened now is it's come to the front of the organization. It's an enabler for business as opposed to a cost center. So I think that change in supply chain and how it's viewed by organizations is very timely, and it's very appropriate, because a cost-effective, efficient, and quality supply chain can do tremendous benefit to a company's revenue and profits. On the flip side, an inefficient supply chain that's not managed well can cause devastating consequences for a company. So as much as I'd like it not to be all about supply chain anymore, because it's kind of getting a little tiresome after 2 years, the fact that it has been elevated, I think, as a visibility within professions and within companies is appropriate.
Love the comments that you made earlier. Supply chain should go back to the background, let everything back to normal. I was on a panel last week, and we were talking about the supply chain risk and how should the board view supply chain. And then this guest speaker next to me, he was president and CEO of a medical device company. And he shared, in the past, sales marketing decided to forecast to be a chief revenue officer coming from that division. So these days is basically how many they can produce, whatever the supply chain can come together, that's the number they're going to sell. So in a way that the chief supply chain officer also wear ahead these days as a chief revenue officer. And that's not the optimal point for business. We really wanted to go back to normal, that we can forecast according to the customer demand, not really constrained by supply capability.
Exactly.
With technological advancement in tracking and technology like AI, it's easier than ever to take control of your end-to-end process and also take the first step towards increasing transparency within the supply chain system. As a tradition of a program, I hope to build an intellectual bridge between the current and the future generations. Einstein said, any intellectual fool can make things bigger and more complex. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. So Lynn, how would you paint a picture for supply clarity through demand transparency by giving it a new perspective?
It's interesting, you made a good point there, and I think it resonates for supply chain professionals. One of the core aspects we need to do is take the complex and make it simple, whether that's in communicating with the leadership team, communicating with the board of directors, Sometimes you'll hear like, well, what is there one impact to a supply chain? And in fact, it's multiple impacts. And that's certainly what we've been seeing right now. And I think it's similar in trying to drive better demand transparency. Take the very complex and break it down to simple of information that you can follow. You think Flex, we have 1,000 customers, right? There's hundreds of thousands of customers using technology today in their products. Some not traditional where they haven't used them before. So the forecasting and demand and ability to anticipate future markets is incredibly difficult for all companies in the ecosystem. But we have all that data. So how can we take the very complex and make it more simple and actionable data? I mentioned the older technology nodes. There's a reason there's less capacity output today than there had been. And there's also a reason why they continue to be utilized by many companies, because kind of workhorses of the industry. So can we get to a point where we're able to really accurately forecast that at a product family level for the next 3, 5, 7 years? That would be tremendously important information for companies that are making those investments. So I think at the core of it's an incredibly complex supply chain that, as a technology expanded into the mass market, that proliferation of content added on to it, the large scale demand coming from 5G, EV, consumer goods, there's that need to make the complex simple. And I think I'll steal that from now on, because I think it fits this initiative very well.
Yeah. One of the challenges for our guest speakers to come up with an analogy with the concept that we're trying to do here. So do you have that metaphor that you want to share with our audience?
Yes, I did come up with one, and it's being a chef. And I am not anywhere near a chef. I love going to a restaurant, but you're intrigued by it, right? Because say you're a chef in a really busy and popular restaurant, and you need to make sure everything runs smoothly to be successful. So you're reliant on your members of your team supplying a timely and accurate information. We need to know how many people are going to be joining for dinner and at what times, to make sure you have enough people there to serve them and the right ingredients to make them. And the wait staff then needs to give accurate information on orders and any requested changes from the guest and communicate that very clearly to the cooking staff. And then they need to make all these dishes that take different amounts of time to end up coming out at the table at the right time, at the right place to serve the customer. So I view that a little bit as a day-to-day experience and a supply chain. So anytime you're going into a busy restaurant, recognize there's a tremendous amount of work being done to manage that complex supply chain to get those meals to your table.
Well, I love it, because I think the best experience you're within a restaurant is it seems like seamless, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it delivered to your table. It seems like effortless. But if you go back to the kitchen, that you see how crazy and how complex that preparation and all the coordination among all the staff. That's a beautiful analogy. Thank you so much. I also have one to exchange idea with you. Imagine you're stuck in traffic and don't know what caused the congestion. You have no idea how long it would take to solve the problem, or if there's an alternative route to take for faster arrival. Meanwhile, your next appointment is approaching, and you lack the information to effectively communicate with the meeting organizer. Now, let's turn on Google Maps, which provides real-time traffic flow and suggests alternative paths with estimated arrival time for each option. Instantly, you have sufficient information to make an informed decision that works best for your situation. So in my analogy, the visibility data and timely feedback provided by Google Maps illustrate the criticality of demand transparency in supply chain.
Very nice.
You could use any map, just because I used to work for Google and I use Google Map every day. Lynn, I appreciate your leadership in driving demand transparency and your partnership in exploring the different perspectives of the elephant in the room today. What is the final thoughts or one thing that you would like our audience to remember?
I would like everybody to remember it's been a challenging 2 years. And if you really think about the past 2 years, people want to talk about the fragility of supply chain or things are broken. It's actually pretty impressive what supply chain professionals have done despite all of those disruptions to continue to power the supply chains around the world. So I think it's an incredibly fascinating profession. It's fast-paced, it's exciting, and we do really need to continue to work together and share knowledge, share best practice, share the learnings that you've had, the good and the bad, to enhance and enable all of our companies going forward to be able to address and respond and prevent future disruptions.
Yeah, that's a very good summary of whatever happened in the last 2 years, the craziness that we deal with, as well as I think it gives a lot of encouragement for what's coming. So Lynn, with the tremendous visibility that you have with all the industry customers and global presence of Flex, which part of the cycle are we in? Are we like at the bottom, so we're going to see the light in the tunnel soon? Or do you think we're heading to another storm? Of course, the Ukraine war just happened. A lot of things that we never expected 2 years ago, right? So any word of wisdom that you would give to help us better understand where we are?
Yeah, for me personally, it's the worst, and it's because of the war in the Ukraine. You add on the humanitarian crisis that we're experiencing on top of all of the shortages. Flex actually has a production facility in the Ukraine. So we're working on managing the supply chain of raw material and critical goods into the country to continue to support our employees. And I actually saw a question in the chat about the neon gas coming from the Ukraine. That's a really important point that he was made, because a lot of people may not know this, but Ukraine supplies 75% of the neon gas used to make semiconductors. So you do an analysis, but 75%, it's just pretty overwhelming, right? We're going to have an impact. The one thing that we are hearing is there's some supply, so it really depends upon how much time it takes for the war to come to an end and the impact there. Everybody's been wanting to predict when we're going to see a return to normal. And it's very challenging because you can only predict knowing what you know today and saying if there are no future crises. Well, we're not to that point yet. Just this week, Shanghai shut down, and we're dealing with the impact of the supply chain coming out of Shanghai, and as we've been dealing with other cities and countries. So it's difficult to predict when we'll come out. A lot of suppliers are saying they'll see more increased output at the end of this year. Some are saying into 2023, and I mentioned the older technology nodes that will take longer to recover. So we are in a very challenging time. The good news is we have over 2 years behind us, and we're here where we're at today. So hopefully we'll be seeing a return to normal sooner rather than later.
Yeah, this is a great reminder, Lynn. Shanghai shut down because the pandemic situation break out over there. And it's a good reminder that we're still in the middle of the pandemic, although we have tired, right, about living this crisis. So I really hope that our conversation today leads to many more discussion in the industry about the supply clarity through demand transparency. Thank you so much, Lynn, for having this chat with me. I also like to thank everyone for attending our live webinar and listening to our podcast. Please share it with your network if you like our program, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Oceanside Chat. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you liked it, please share this podcast and stay tuned for our next episode. We'll see you later.